paranormal world is evolving. UFOs, psychic mediums, ghosts, and the unexplained have become part of the fabric of our lives. The S-Files is the next step in that evolution. I'm Matt Slies, founder and lead investigator with 111 Paranormal.
And I'm Laura Slies, psychic medium, empath, founder and lead investigator with 111 Paranormal. And this is the S-Files.
And good evening to you all. It is the S-Files on Lorain County Country, 107.7 FM, 1320 AM, and online, WOBLradio.com. The S-Files brought to you by Black River Crystal. I am Matt Slies, and I'm joined by my wife, founder and lead investigator of 111 Paranormal, Laura.
Hello.
How you doing?
Peachy.
We're also joined by our technical guru, Facebook maven, all-around good guy, John Jenkinson.
Hello.
How you doing?
John.
I am doing well. Thank you.
It's good to know you're doing well. I like that. We need pizza in here. I think we need some pizza. Saturday night.
That would be horrible. Can you imagine? Everyone, let's take a moment to enjoy a slice.
Just hear us, watching us on Facebook Live. And you can get in touch with us on our website, 111paranormal.com. You can email the S-Files at 111paranormal.com or follow us on Facebook at 111paranormal OH. Last week, we talked about alien abductions.
Yes, we did. Those were so interesting.
And we found out more. We watched something, was it yesterday or today, about somebody actually came up. They said they were abducted, and they went up to the spaceship and actually saw humans in like
a stasis kind of
animated state.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder,
sort of like the movie. When I saw them show what they thought was what their interpretation of what the woman said was, it reminded me of the movie V. You remember the miniseries V, where they had people, but that was for food. Mm-hmm. So that's a different story. Anyway.
But you got to wonder, and this you have to wonder maybe this is all a dream and we're actually all in a state and we're just...
Dude, that's the Matrix.
We're just dreaming all this.
You just never, you won't watch, he doesn't watch the Matrix.
Well, what was it?
It's quantum physics. I can't understand it.
The Men in Black when we were all in the marble?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And our universe was this little tiny thing.
I'm already beyond my depth on that one.
Little glitter flickers in the marble.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes my brain bleed.
What were we watching that we were talking about? Time. It was like, it was an alien show. Oh, on Netflix. Yeah. Was it Alien Encounters or something? Wow. Really, really good show.
We're going to try and get that guy.
5-part series. And about a guy who has been, George Knapp, who's a journalist who's been doing this kind of stuff forever. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but it was a really good show. And they were talking about how it could all be a time travel thing, and that some of the aliens that people see when they put humans into this computer system, they did like a analysis of what humans would evolve into and what it turns out when they shoot forward in time thousands of years, it looks like the aliens that we say we see.
Wow.
So it was a really cool show. Yeah, we're going to try to get George Knapp on here to talk about it.
And I can see that. I think that's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah.
So if you've got any thoughts on that or our subject matter tonight, again, our website, 111paranormal.com, email the S-Files at 111paranormal.com, or follow us on Facebook at 111paranormal OH. We are going to talk about an American psychic, seer, what have you.
Prophet. Probably the most famous in our lifetimes, honestly. Like he's, for me, I've been interested in his readings and all of his books and everything for many, many years.
Edgar Cayce. Born March 18th, 1877, and he left this mortal coil January 3rd, 1945, just before the end of World War II. He was known as the sleeping psychic or the sleeping prophet because he could fall asleep on top of books and remember the facts and illustrations, like osmosis. I wish I could have done that in college with math and certain things. That would be great. He gave more than, wait for it, 14,000 documented readings to people, including Harry Houdini, who was also a spiritualist, Thomas Edison, also a spiritualist, Woodrow Wilson, the president, which I didn't know. Yeah, and I don't know, the last Marilyn Monroe, I don't think so.
That's one of the things that's documented on the Wikipedia about it, so I don't know. But I wrote it down because they did say it, so.
You never know. Could
have been when she was early
Norma
on,
Jean?
or,
When she was just Norma Jean, you never know.
Right.
So, according to the book, his book called...
Well, that was not part of what we were supposed to read.
No,
okay, anyway.
Okay. Hey, according to his biography...
There you go.
In May 1889, that sounds so long ago, while reading the Bible, good boy, in his hut in the woods...
Well, he grew up in Kentucky, so, they had
call
a
that
farm.
a shack down there, don't they, John?
That or an outhouse.
Well, it wasn't that. It was more like a fort that he had created as a kid when he was about, I don't know, 7, 8 years old. Yeah.
So you got to know, at the time, 1889, okay, so it's like 30 years after the Civil War. So it just shows you just how young this country still is. Anyway, a young Cayce saw a woman with wings who told him that his prayers were answered and asked him what he wanted most of all. He was frightened, but he said the most he wanted was to help others, especially sick children. I mean, if it was me, I would have been like, I want that, but it just shows he has a good heart.
He came from a very Christian family.
Rural.
So, rural Kentucky. And he didn't really know much of anything, church every week and probably more than once a week even. So that was what he was used to, hence why he was down there reading the Bible. That's the book that he had in his hand was a Bible.
Yeah. So the next night, after a complaint from the school teacher, his father ruthlessly tested him for spelling, eventually knocking him out of his chair in exasperation. At that point, Cayce heard the voice of the lady who had appeared the day before. She told him that if he could sleep a little, they could help him. They, angels, watchers, we don't know.
He said angel, but again, that's what he was exposed to. So do we know really what the being was? No. But when he was a kid, he thought it was an angel.
Right. He begged for a rest and put his head on his spelling book. When his father came back into the room and woke him up, he knew all the answers. In fact, he could repeat anything in the book. His father thought he had been fooling before and knocked him out of the chair again. You can't please this guy. Eventually, Cayce used all his school books that way. By 1892, the teacher regarded Cayce as his best student. On being questioned, Cayce told the teacher that he saw pictures of the pages in the books. His father became proud of this accomplishment and spread it around, resulting in Cayce becoming different from his peers. So it just goes to show you he wasn't all that great to his son, but he could use it to his advantage and exploited his strength. Look at that.
Well, and I mean, back in those days, he was so young. I don't think he knew to kind of keep it a secret, so they talked about it.
I'm surprised they didn't run him out of town with torches.
Me too, to be honest with you, because I'm surprised they didn't think it was like witchy and that kind of thing, but they talked about it from where he was and he was a really small town, so everybody knew everybody. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how they wouldn't have.
The townsfolk would have just gathered around with torches. Get out of here.
I mean, it's possible. So let's talk about a little bit about some of the abilities that were given to him after that,
incident
encounter with the angel, as he would say. So he would do these trance-like readings where he would sort of, people thought he was sleeping, which is why they called him a sleeping prophet. But it was a meditative state, really, what it was. But he was so good at that he could really just kind of like instantly go into this meditative state. And everyone around him thought that he was sleeping. And while he was in that state, he could provide insights on all different things like health, spirituality, history, and the future.
Mm.
I mean, I think one of the coolest things about him is that he could diagnose ailments for people, and he never wanted them to be in the same room with him. He got better readings from them if he just was told like their name and where they lived or something like that. And I think we talk a little bit more about it down in the show, but really interesting stuff. Again, he could prophesize, so he would talk about prophecies about the future. He could reveal past lives that people had lived. Really cool stuff. I do know a story about a family that brought their son to him, and they were like, well, he doesn't like to play with like normal toys. All he wants to do is just building blocks, and like like all he wants to do is just like rocks and build them and things like that. And Edgar Cayce did a reading on him and found out that in his past life he was an engineer. So that kind of explained, and he said, you need to nurture that because that's where his strengths lie. It was really interesting. He was also a medium. He didn't like to talk about the mediumship much because he was a Christian, and he thought that really conflicted with his beliefs, but eventually he accepted it. But he also said that he could astral project, and that he had, we'll talk about the next one a little bit later. He could see auras, which I thought was really cool, because so can I. So I have that in common with him. And when it says dream work, it said Cayce was said to have dream work abilities. I'm not even sure what that means, other than when he was in his trance, everybody thought he was sleeping, so they were always saying that he was dreaming these things, and these things would come to him in dreams, and people would come to him in dreams and things like that.
I've got that ability. I tell you, I do some of my best work. Ideas come up when I'm sleeping.
Is that why you always want to sleep?
That's right.
Okay.
Oh, I'm just tired. I'm old. Did you talk about the Akashic Records?
I was going to talk about that a little bit more, but...
it was one of his source where he said he had direct connection to that. Yeah, he said
he could connect to it. And as far as I'm aware, there have only been a certain number of people on the planet who have ever said that they could connect to the Akashic Record. And the Akashic Record, for people who may not know what that is, so it's supposed to be a collection of all events, thoughts, feelings, and actions that have ever happened on this plane.
A giant card catalog of
everything.
Humanity.
So Edgar Cayce said that he could tap into it, and so he could see, like, he had ideas on how the pyramids were built, and he said that they were built because first of all, he said they were built more than 10,000 years ago. At that time. So, and at the time in the 40s, he was saying this, there was belief that the pyramids were only about 3,000 years old, 2,000 years old. And he said no, he was told that they were 10,000 years old. And that the Akashic Records told him that the Egyptians, I don't even know if I want to say Egyptians, the beings who built the pyramids of Giza were able to levitate the stones into place, and that's how they were able to build it and lift those stones that were hundreds of tons.
Because nobody really knows how they built them.
No.
I mean, it's still...
There are these really, really weak things that archaeologists will say, but that's because they're not, as an archaeologist, you're not allowed to bring any kind of paranormal into play.
I mean, thousands of years ago, they said the stones were cut with like a laser-like precision, which again, they only had hand tools back then. So you never know. This one, John, this will be good for us. Edgar Cayce first achieved local notoriety for having lost his voice, completely silent, but yet during hypnosis he was able to speak.
Well, how about that?
Yeah. You're getting very sleepy. Hello. After initially reporting his voice had spontaneously returned on his own, he later began publicly crediting a local osteopath with having restored his voice.
Yeah, osteopaths are licensed health providers who use holistic approaches and treat the body's musculoskeletal system. And this is when when Edgar Cayce really became involved in wanting to know more about holistic medicine. And, I mean, really, people thought that he was illiterate. I mean, he only had like a 6th grade education. But we heard today we were watching, what was it? What show was it? Ancient Aliens. And they had a special show on Edgar Cayce. So we wanted to watch that. And they have this great recording, one of the only recordings, I believe, of him, maybe the only recording of him, while he was under doing one of his readings. And boy, he did not sound like he was an illiterate person at all. Like, his speech was very eloquent. He was
No
talking,
accent.
No accent. He was, I mean, just, it blew me away to hear him speak.
And also, this is kind of freaky. There's pictures of him, but there's only one bit of color footage of him. The only film ever taken back in like the late 30s, color film. That's the only thing and I spoke to somebody from the Edgar Cayce Institute trying to get somebody on the show. And he said that Edgar Cayce didn't like his picture taken, and he didn't like being on film.
Yeah.
So there you go. The osteopath began employing Cayce as a medical clairvoyant who could reportedly diagnose patients at a distance through supernatural means. In 1910, Cayce's readings were covered in a widely reprinted story in the New York Times. Another collaboration led Cayce to, here's the Ohio connection, Dayton, Ohio. The final chapter of his life was spent in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where he oversaw an institute of his own creation, which we'll talk about later. He actually has an Edgar Cayce Institute. So we actually I reached out to them, and the guy's like, yeah, I'll come on the show with you, but he never texted me. So if you're listening, Jack,
Hey, well, I would do another show on Edgar Cayce any day, because you could take each one of the things that he was involved in and do a whole show on them. To me, one of the best things that he was involved in, and I have 2 books that I've read of his on Atlantis. He would talk about the lost city of Atlantis, and he really believed that Atlantis was built by immortals, by gods, and that's why it was such an advanced civilization. But I could talk days about Edgar Cayce and all the different aspects.
You can't have a paranormal radio show and not talk about this guy, because again, you just the more. And I was doing the research. I mean, obviously, the paranormal has its critics, and counter explanations of what. See, I'm losing my voice. I need to get hypnotized. But you don't see too much on him about, any type of negative feedback on him. He's actually very held in very high regard.
Yeah, and there are of course you'll see the stories here and there where he was a fake. But I'll tell you what, the people that he diagnosed and that he cured, those families would never say that, because there were things that he could do that no one else has ever done before or after. He just was amazing.
We're talking Edgar Cayce on this week's edition of, excuse me, the S-Files.
Your voice.
I am losing my voice. On WOBL, Lorraine County Country, 107.7 FM, 1320 AM, and online, WOBLradio.com. Matt Slies, Laura Slies, John Jenkinson, regaling you with supernatural tales on this Saturday evening. And we're brought to you by Black River Crystal. During this chaotic period, more and more people are discovering the power of crystals and metaphysical New Age methods. Black River Crystal is the place to help you on your journey to balance your universe, past, present, and future. We offer a large variety of crystals, towers, spheres, raw and polished tumbles, amethyst, obsidian, selenite, moldavite, and much, much more. Reiki healing sessions or tarot readings are available on site. We have a great staff that are ready to help you find what you need to balance your universe. Located at 23013 Sprague Road in Columbia Station, or call 440-941-3403. If you can't make it to the store, don't worry. You can shop online 24/7 at blackrivercrystal.com or email questions to blackrivercrystal@gmail.com.
Hello, this is Dakota Layden,
Kelsey Layden,
Tanner Wiseman, and Alex Schrader. And you are listening to the S-Files. Dun, dun, dun!
I couldn't do that right now. Something's going on here. I apologize, everybody, but it's live radio. It's not pretty.
What I wanted to talk about a little bit about was some of the that New York Times article that we were just mentioning. So that was entitled "Illiterate Man Becomes a Doctor When Hypnotized." So they said the same thing, that they just, they weren't sure about him, and I think they were trying to sort of promote it as, oh, this is, who knows about this? It's really kind of a fun thing,
A novelty.
But I wanted, Matt, why don't you read some of the story that came? This is directly from that article.
That would be on October 10th, 1922?
No, it's the one where it says some of the story. It says the medical fraternity of the country is taking a lively interest in the strange power said to be possessed by Edgar Cayce. Mm-hmm. So go ahead and...
To diagnose difficult diseases while in a semi-conscious state, though he had not the slightest knowledge of medicine when not in this condition. So if he wasn't hypnotized, he had
no knowledge. In fact, he didn't often... I don't think he ever remembered what he would tell people while he was hypnotized, and that's why he was sort of leery of it, because he would tell the doctors that wanted him to do it constantly, he would say to them, I don't want to do this if I'm going to hurt someone. So you listen to what I'm saying and telling them, and you make sure that it's not something dangerous, because I don't want to hurt anybody.
Right. Plausible denial, yeah.
So more of that story was...
Yeah, so at a medical conference, Dr. Wesley Ketchum, Edgar Cayce's doctor, said that over the past 4 years, Cayce had more or less been under his observation. Ketchum spoke about Cayce's ability and created such widespread interest among the 700 doctors present that one of the leading Boston medical men who heard his speech invited Dr. Ketchum to prepare a paper as part of the program of the September meeting of the American Society of Clinical Research. Dr. Ketchum sent the paper but did not go to Boston. The paper was read by Henry E. Harpower, M.D. of Chicago, a contributor to the Journal of the American Medical Association from the AMA. From the writing of Dr. Ketchum, my subject simply lies down and folds his arms, goes to sleep. While in the sleep, which for all intents and purposes is a natural sleep, his objective mind is completely inactive and only subjective mind is working. I next gave him the name and exact location of my patient, and in a few minutes, he begins to talk as clearly and distinctly as anyone. He usually goes into minutiae detail in diagnosing a case, and especially if it is a very serious case. His language is usually of the best, and his psychological terms and description of the nervous anatomy would do credit to any professor of nervous anatomy, and there is no faltering in his speech, and all his statements are clear and concise. He handles the most complex cases with as much ease as any Boston physician, which to me is quite wonderful in view of the fact that while in his normal state, he is an illiterate man, especially along the line of medicine, surgery, or pharmacy, of which he knows nothing.
Yeah, so that's the exact, for the Medical Association and hundreds of doctors were so interested in what he was doing, and that is the direct line from Dr. Ketchum's observations and paper that he wrote about Cayce, which I thought was really cool, considering we heard one of those, and it really is like that. He was really quick with his answers. He was describing it. He was knowledgeable. It was incredible.
Yeah, he's talking about the third cervical...
cervical system.
Right.
He was saying, like, he was telling somebody, you have to massage this in a counterclockwise way between the 5th and 6th cervical, not any other parts of it. It has to be between the 5th and 6th cervical, and it'll help. Like, we were just like, wow, that's pretty cool.
That was Ma Rainey's rheumatism.
With everything that's going on, was there any talk, and I might be missing something that could be coming up, but of him having any kind of a multiple personality disorder or anything?
No.
Wow, because it seems like maybe he would have a personality when he's awake and one when he's hypnotized.
No. Nothing like that. I mean, he was very well respected, and they didn't think anything like that. To hear that when he was under, he was like a Boston physician, but when he wasn't, he was a simpleton. Yeah.
I
don't think he really was. I don't think he was a simpleton, but I just think that they this is aristocracy. These are doctors in the early 1900s, and to them, any commoner was
anybody on the Kentucky
less,
or
So you think when they say illiterate man, they didn't mean he was illiterate?
No, I don't think they meant that. I think what they just meant is not at their level.
I would have thought that they gave him a book and he couldn't read it.
Oh no, he could. He could read, and that's why. When I was reading some of the stuff later, it was clearly saying like he was not illiterate, but that's what they were saying because they were elitist and
So let me ask this question real quick. So you have this power. What usually happens when people discover you have an ability?
They use you.
They exploit it.
Exactly. Which leads me to the next paragraph. Cayce's increasing popularity attracted entrepreneurs who wanted to use his reported clairvoyance. Although he was reluctant to help them, he was persuaded to give readings. This left him dissatisfied with himself. I could see that. A cotton merchant offered him, and this is back in the day, $100.
A day.
A day. I mean, that's
a lot of money in the early 1900s.
It's a lot of money now. $100 a day for readings about the cotton market. But despite his poor finances, Cayce refused the merchant's offer. Some people wanted to know where to hunt for treasure, and others wanted to know the outcome of horse races.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't, I was telling John before the show, like, the one thing that he struggled with was his belief in Christianity and making this meld with that. Like, he struggled a lot with thinking that this was against God. And so he would never charge people. And so, like, even years later when he had his institute where he would do all these readings, in order to get a reading, you would become a member of the institute. And you would pay a membership due, but that was separate from, like, he would then do a reading and it would stay with the institute. He would give a copy of it to the person, but that's where they would collect all of it. But he never charged an individual to do a reading.
It's just like an entrance fee to the club, basically.
Yeah, I mean, but that was how they avoided him getting arrested, too, because back in the day that he was doing this, it was illegal. So...
Yeah, it's really weird things in the early 1900s where, there was this interest in spiritualism, but yet, Big Brother's watching.
Seems like a big interest in spiritualism, too.
Well, after the Civil War, it just kind of...
Yeah.
Blew up because people wanted to contact their loved ones because obviously, war does things to people.
Right.
So Cayce's friends and family asked him how they could become psychic. That's interesting. Hey, how can I do this? Out of this apparently simple question came an 11-year discourse which led to the creation of study groups. In his altered state, Cayce relayed to the groups that the meaning of life is not to become psychic, but to become more spiritually aware and loving person. Well, the more you give, the more you get. Edgar told people that they could bring light into a waiting world and the lessons could be studied in 100 years. The readings were now about dreams, coincidence, which is another word for synchronicity, developing intuition, the Akashic records, astrology, past relationships, soulmates, and other esoteric subjects. Fast forward to June of 1931, 61 people attended a meeting to carry on Cayce's work and form the Association of Research and Enlightenment, ARE. I like that.
It still exists.
People seeking a reading from Cayce were asked to join the ARE.
Like I just said.
This helped insulate Cayce from charges of fortune-telling, which was illegal in some states. They had a thing called, we were watching something. When I grew up, by my house, I'd be driving with my mom. We'd pass this little building, and it was called the tea room. And I'm like, oh, you go in there, what are they doing there? You just have tea. Well, obviously, there was a place where you would drink tea, but they would read your leaves. It was actually a place where you could get your fortune told.
Well, there were always places. Maybe we didn't notice them so much, but they've been around since the beginning of time, honestly.
Yeah, so
you had shamans and, those people who were mediums. I mean, they've always been with us.
As Laura pointed out, he was not directly charging a fee for services, but receiving a salary from the member-supported ARE, kind of like PBS. Apart from supporting Cayce and his staff, a major emphasis of the early ARE was the encouragement of small groups devoted to spiritual study, prayer, and meditation. Flip the page. This is live radio.
So, yeah, we're going back and forth. So, you can read this part, and then I want to talk a little bit about his diagnosis of his wife.
Well, in November of 31, Cayce's wife Gertrude and Secretary Gladys Davis were arrested for pretending to tell fortunes. When charges were dismissed, papers noticed that Cayce's readings included tales of ancient civilizations, including ancient Egypt, El Dorado, and Atlantis.
Yeah, I would recommend to anybody to find books that where Edgar Cayce talks about the lost city of Atlantis, and also his ancient Egypt. I want to say stories. One of the ones that I think is the coolest, and I don't know that I talk about it a little bit, maybe under predictions, but why not just bring it up because it's so interesting. So during one of his meditations, he said that future, I don't know what you call it, future man would find that in the left paw of the Sphinx, there would be a room. And in that room would be the records that the people that survived from Atlantis had put the history of the world and where people came from and the whole idea of our race and how man became to be. And not that long ago, I believe it was 10 years ago, there was a gentleman, an archaeologist and a geologist, who was doing some work around the Sphinx, and they had set up these things around the Sphinx and it was sound waves,
Sonar
to measure where they were trying to determine where the water, because the Sphinx has signs of water erosion around it. So they were trying to determine when and where that happened, right? So while they were doing that, they came across 3 parts underneath the Sphinx that had openings that were not natural. So man-made openings. And one of them was under the left paw of the Sphinx. And it was a room that they detected under there. And as soon as that happened, the Egyptian government came forth and made them stop, and no one's ever been able to look at it since.
I wonder if there's any. I wonder if they even. At least thousands of years, I'm sure. The papyrus, whatever they wrote out. So I'm sure it's probably.
Depending on how it was preserved.
If there's water, maybe.
These
I'm wondering if they had like the hieroglyphics on the wall inside and they won't let them in.
Don't forget, Atlantis was an advanced society. So who knows what's in there, but it's too bad we can't have somebody excavate that and find out, because that's exactly where Edgar Cayce said we would find the history of mankind.
Interesting stuff. Cayce's son, Hugh Lynn, proposed that they develop a library of research into the phenomena and sponsor study groups, with Cayce doing 2 readings a day. The association accepted this, and Hugh Lynn began publishing a monthly bulletin for association members. The bulletin contained readings on general interest subjects, interesting cases, book reviews on psychic subjects, health hints from readings, and news about psychic phenomena in other fields. So basically, he invented the newsletter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or message board in the 1990s.
Yeah.
Problems. Hugh Lynn continued to build files of case histories, parallel studies in psychic phenomena, and research readings from the study groups. In fact, we saw a library in the Institute.
Oh,
they're all like leather-bound. There's like hundreds of hardbound books of all readings. It's a whole library.
His secretary Gladys was there, and she was there for every reading until he died, and would handwrite the reading, or speed write it out shorthand, and then would transcribe them. So most of what's in those novels right now are all of her transcriptions of those 14,000 readings. But they also said when we were watching that TV show that there are thousands more that are still not transcribed and typed up, that they still are studying to this day.
Right, a lot of numbers. Association activities remain simple, so they didn't have a big Christmas party or anything. Members raised funds for an office, library, and vault, which they added to the Cayce residence in 1940 to 41. Association membership averaged 500 to 600, with the annual turnover about 50%. The other half was a solid basis for research, an audience of case studies, pamphlets, bulletins, including the Congress Bulletin, which was a yearbook and record of Congress events. a mailing list of several thousand surf people who remained interested in Cayce's activities. So this is kind of groundbreaking for that time. It really is. Cayce is known as the father of holistic medicine. As many of the maladies he would diagnose, he would also give ways to heal those using things outside of what the medical field was currently using or doing.
So, the one that we heard about today, which I thought was really interesting, was he had, his wife had contracted tuberculosis. And the doctor said, she's dying, she's going to die. And so his wife begged him to do a psychic reading on her. And he finally did. When the doctor said that there was nothing more they could do and she was going to die, he did one. And while he was under, he was told that she needed to, take a burned oak barrel, fill it with, what was it? Was it red wine, apple cider, something? I don't know, something like that, and boil it. And then she needed to ingest the fumes, like breathe in the fumes of it. And it cured her. So they did it. And so they did this for a number of other people that had tuberculosis, and they lived, and it cured them too. So how crazy is that? Like,
it didn't catch on either, because you could have closed a bunch of sanitariums with that cure.
Sanatoriums.
That too.
Yeah.
Sanitarium. So crazy people get tuberculosis too.
But then they get sent to the sanatorium.
That's right. Then they go to the crematorium. But anyway.
So let's talk about, that's not nice. Let's talk about some of the predictions, because he did do some predictions while he was under as well. And from what we have heard on TV shows and things like that, he's one of the most, how would you say it?
Advocates?
Accurate.
He's one of the most accurate prophets to ever live. So, I know people say that Nostradamus was a prophet, but one of those things with, like, his quatrains, my gosh, you could really interpret those to mean a million different things. So,
plus translation and everything.
Right.
So.
But Cayce didn't do that. Like, he said it right out, what he thought was happening.
Before we get into predictions.
No, not yet. Wait a little bit.
No, we have to do.
All right, go ahead.
I'm the producer of this show.
We'll produce.
I'm producing. We are talking Edgar Cayce on this week's edition of the S-Files on WOBL, Lorain County Country, 107.7 FM, 1320 AM, and online, WOBLradio.com. Matt Slies, Laura Slies, John Jenkinson, and the S-Files is sponsored by Black River Crystal. During this chaotic period, more and more people are discovering the power of crystals and metaphysical New Age methods. Black River Crystal is the place to help you on your journey to balance your universe, past, present, and future. We offer a large variety of crystals, towers, spheres, raw and polished tumbles, amethyst, obsidian, selenite, moldavite, and much, much more. Reiki healing sessions, aura and tarot readings are available on site. We have a great staff that are ready to help you find what you need to balance your universe. Located at 23013 Sprague Road in Columbia Station, or call 440-941-3403. If you can't make it to the store, don't worry. You can shop online 24/7 at blackrivercrystal.com, or email questions to blackrivercrystal@gmail.com.
What's going on? I'm Dalen.
Man, it's the Paranormal Poppy Juwan, man.
And I am the Marcus Harvey. And we are the Ghost Brothers.
And you are tuned in to the S-Files, baby.
You gonna just give them a theme song?
I gave them a theme song.
Everybody wants to give us a theme tune.
I know. Seems like that's the...
We bring up the musicality in people.
That's good. That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. So we're talking about Edgar Cayce, and we talked about his life and how he built up his Institute of Research and some of the case files that he did, cured his wife of tuberculosis. And so he also was a prophet and made several predictions. So, Laura, talk about the predictions that he made.
So one of the ones I thought was interesting was that he said that climate change would happen, and that he predicted that the polar axis of the Earth would shift, and that many areas that are now land would again become ocean floor, and that would cause the lost city of Atlantis to rise again, which I thought was really kind of interesting.
Well, the water levels are rising in the Atlantic
Well, yeah.
So
That's true.
this is a creepy one right here.
This this is cool, though. In 1924, he predicted the stock market would crash in 29 and also taught his clients how to prepare for the crash and how to play the stock market. Many of his clients, like, in the beginning listened to him, but it started to really, like, rise. So they got back into it and ended up losing everything because they just didn't listen to him. So...
He also foresaw the Great Depression, which he said the stock market crash would trigger, and it would lift in the spring of 1933. And
another one that he predicted was the war, which ended up being World War II, in which many nations would participate. He mentioned that the countries of Austria, Germany, and Japan would join the war on one side, and that the U.S. would enter the war in 1941. And he described that the magnitude of the war was as if the world would be set on fire.
Foreshadowing the nuclear bomb, but also, you mentioned Austria. Well, when Hitler annexed Austria to go with Germany, they said that was probably the first act of World War II. Yeah. So Cayce suggested that the ancient Hall of Records in the Great Pyramid would be discovered at a time signifying the manifestation of this new level of consciousness.
And that's what I was just talking about. So that Hall of Records is, he said that there were 3 survivors from Atlantis that went to 3 different parts of the world and hid these records in 3 different halls of records. And so the one that I was talking about was under the paw of the Sphinx. But there are 2 others, and I'm not 100% sure where those are, that are supposed to exist. But they wouldn't be found until humanity was ready for something like that. And I mean, I will say, like, we move closer and closer to acceptance of things like paranormal and supernatural. And I do think that, I hope that in my lifetime we'll be able to discover that or bring that out so that people can learn how to kind of live differently, and they have to embrace that subconscious part of them.
What do you think, John?
It's interesting because I see, the more I hear about this, the more I see it in a lot of different things that are happening now. And I'm not talking about like prolific things or that, but obviously other people are, there's a lot of people out there that study this to some point, and they interpret it in different ways. But even in mainstream culture, there are things that are happening even now that I can think of in the last few days that I would have never tied to this, and now that I'm hearing this, I'm tying it to it. And it's some really strange stuff. So the first one of them I'm going to say, I just literally yesterday watched a show. I'm a foodie. I watched a food show, and this girl was in there cooking, and she deliberately burnt up some spices and everything. And she didn't like cook them. She didn't do anything. She set them on fire and burned them. And they were like, "Why are you doing that?" And she was talking about how burning things can not only enhance flavors of things, but can help heal things and stuff. And you were talking about the burning of this barrel everything and that. And she did this, and no one wanted to eat this because it was covered with this charred ash that she put over the whole meal. And people tried it, and they were like, it looked disgusting. I thought it was gross. It's unbelievably delicious and everything. And she said that her thing is to help make food heal people.
That's all ties in.
And I was just like, holy smokes, I just saw this yesterday.
Wow.
And then the other thing I was thinking was, this is a little bit of a stretch, but you were talking about the aura and the timekeeping and all this other stuff and that. And I was thinking of the Marvel universe. I don't know if you've watched Loki, the off series of it and everything. And they've got this time realm where he got sent to. And it's beyond anything like even the Marvel Universe had, It's past all these stones and everything and all this other stuff. But in there, when he got in, they took a picture of him. And he's like, "What's that?" And they said, "This is a picture of your aura." And they put it in this record. And then they had a giant stack of papers, and they're like, "Can you sign this? It's just a verification of everything you've said throughout your entire life." And he was like, "What?"
So it's
and
the
all of a sudden
Akashic
another
record.
page came out and said, "What?" And he goes, "And you'll have to sign this one too."
Yeah.
And then
that's
everything
funny.
he said kept coming out on this printer. And he was like, and I was like, exactly the
Yeah.
Akashic record thing. And I was like, holy smokes, that was tied, in my opinion, tied
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah.
But before this show, no idea. Nah.
Well, you mentioned that, Hollywood. Well, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, that's a whole
That's a
other
whole other
story.
show. That's a whole other show on that one. We're going to read from Edgar Cayce.
Yeah, I wanted to write this down just because I thought this is really cool. So I actually found a dream that he wrote down word for word afterwards when he woke up what happened to him.
So it was in January of 1936. Cayce gave a reading predicting the destruction of Los Angeles and San Francisco, followed by New York City. This was in March of 1936. So this is in his own words, and I quote, "I had been born again in 2100 AD in Nebraska. The sea apparently covered all of the western part of the country, as the city where I lived was on the coast. The family name was a strange one. At an early age as a child, I declared myself to be Edgar Cayce, who I lived 200 years before. Scientists, men with long beads, little hair.
I think it meant long beards.
Long beards. Well, they were hippies, maybe.
Yeah.
Little hair and thick glasses were called in to observe me. They decided to visit the places where I said I had been born, lived, and worked in Kentucky, Alabama, New York, Michigan, and Virginia. Taking me with them, the group of scientists visited these places in a long, cigar-shaped metal flying ship, which moved at high speed. Water-covered part of Alabama, Norfolk, Virginia, had become an immense seaport. New York had been destroyed either by war or an immense earthquake and was being rebuilt. Industries were scattered over the countryside. Most of the houses were built of glass. Many records of my work as Edgar Cayce were discovered and collected. The group returned to Nebraska, taking the records with them to study. These changes in the earth will come to pass, for the time and times and half times are at an end, and these begins those periods for the readjustments."
I mean, that's really interesting stuff.
And you
though.
think the Book of Revelation was messed up? That sounds really messed up too.
It is. Well, we could talk a little bit about what I was saying about how there are, because Edgar Cayce believed that aliens lived with us too, and that's one show we're gonna go into a show about that at some point, talking about how they may actually live among us, and one of the reasons why they sort of can control or have shown that they can control nuclear sites and things like that is because they don't want this planet to be destroyed any more than we do, right? Because they live here too. A lot of it is underwater, even bases underwater and things like that. What I found interesting, why I'm thinking about that, is because he's saying he traveled in a cigar-shaped metal vehicle that moved really fast, and I'm like, well, that's basically what we describe. A lot of the things that we see that are UFOs are those cigar-shaped ones, especially the ones that go underwater.
Well,
So that's what made me think about talking about how they already do live with us, and they're kind of guiding our movement into technology. You know.
Yeah, and the other I've been thinking about this throughout the show as well. Speaking of the water aspect of it, I was reading again recently that we have explored way deeper into space than we have into the oceans.
Right.
And they said it seems like we ought to have covered the oceans better than we have so far. And for some reason, unexplained by anyone in at least in this readings that I had, there's just absolutely no reason for it. But I'm thinking 2/3 of the planet is underwater.
Yes.
And I think there is a reason for that. And I do believe if they are here, I think a lot of them are down there. And like you said, Atlantis and stuff like that, I think that's the kind of places where they hang out.
Well, we saw something where about that alien thing, and they said that some of them came out of the ocean.
Well, yeah, there's a whole, one of the ones we've talked about was one of the videos that we showed that they released to the public, that the Navy or whatever was released to the public, shows one hovering above water and then going into the water, and absolutely no splash. No, so it's a vehicle that can fly in the sky and then submerge itself and go underwater. So which we don't have that technology.
Well, and the thing is, we don't have that technology, but there have been shows about it and everything. Because you go back to, I mean, I'm older than you guys, but I used to watch Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Oh, sure.
And the flying sub was just fascinating to me. And I was like, why don't they build this thing and everything? But they weren't the only one. There was a show, UFO, which was on years ago, where America had a force that fought aliens that came from space. And their main base was underwater, and they had a flying rocket that would come out and defend the Earth almost every episode that came up out of the ocean. And I was like, is there always, and who knows, maybe they have been hiding stuff since the 1800s or something.
The problem is that you go down into the the amount of pressure.
That's it.
Even the
that we can't handle for now because we don't have the technology.
Exactly.
And maybe that's for a good reason, because we don't want to discover that kind of thing. That brings up another thing that Matt and I were talking about is like aliens having control of, or having some, not control, but some involvement in the things that get released to the public.
Sure.
In the way of like books, movies, like The Abyss. Like The Abyss came out, that movie, and that's the movie where there were alien bases underground, and they were, they were scared, but then they saved the main character, and the woman in the movie was so like, she was just like, they were beautiful, she thought they were beautiful, but then you had one person who was freaking out about it and was going to launch a nuke, and so like, but is there a way that they are releasing things into the public to kind of
I
plant the seeds?
I remember, I think we talked about it on the show, but I believe I've talked to you before. I've listened to some late night programming and that. And, one of the common themes, which they'll start talking about it, but the minute they start talking about it, someone else will jump in and say, hey, we aren't going to talk about that right now. We aren't going to talk about that right now. And one of the themes in it is that, they're like, we don't have to, for some reason, fossil fuels is when it usually comes up. They're like, we're burning out the world's fossil fuels. And someone jumps in all the time on these shows that I listen to, and they're like, well, we really don't have to worry about that because they told us when we do that, they're going to give us the answer. And then they're like, well, don't be talking about that because we're not supposed to talk about that stuff right now and everything.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever heard that.
Yeah, they said they went further where they explained that it's the alien civilization that is living here is going to give us the answer when we get to the point that we need it, but not until
and I hope when we get to the point that we wouldn't be aggressive towards them.
Well, yeah.
Because at this point, mankind is...
The way they make it sound is like they already know that it's accepted. There's a certain population out there that walks among them,
Yeah.
And that is already accepted. And they know that these people are looking out for us. They're way beyond us. And they will give us what we need when we need it, but not until then.
Which then kind of also kind of goes into the idea on this thing we watched on Netflix about aliens, where they said that the aliens that we see, like the Greys and the aliens we see, could be us in the future. Mm-hmm. And that kind of plays into that too, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they're watching and managing how we proceed to make sure that they still exist in the future and that we don't wipe ourselves out.
And not to say that they aren't time travelers that came back assigned to make sure we don't do something that wiped us out before along the timelines, and it's weird how it all, like I said, rolls kind of together.
Got a question here. Somebody wanted to know, where else could they learn about Edgar Cayce? Well, he's got a website, the foundation does, Edgar Cayce's and readings, Edgar Cayce's ARE, and you can go on www.edgarcayce.org. They talk about his readings, the mission of the ARE, health and wellness, and they actually have a center down in Virginia. So if you want more information about Edgar Cayce, check out the website.
And honestly, like if you go to any bookstore or, Barnes & Noble's online or whatever, you will find a ton of books either by him or about him, about his life, about the things that he believed in. And one of the the biggest things that he believed in was that everybody had the power to do what he did. He believed that, and that you had to find that place of meditation, and that you could do the same things. And there are books where he talks about trying to find that balance within yourself of peacefulness.
And for those,
go ahead. No.
For those of you wondering, it's Cayce.
Oh,
so,
yes, true.
If you're looking and you're, typing in Kay and not finding him, it's Cayce, Edgar Cayce.
Thank you, John. Thank you. How did you pronounce it? How did you pronounce it when you
Cayce?
Cayce. Right.
Yeah. Until they told me, I was like, oh, we're doing a show on whoever Edgar Cayce is.
Rick's brother.
I have been so involved in everything Edgar Cayce since I was a little girl. I think I'm not sure how I first heard about him or learned about him. I don't think my father had any books about him. My dad was the one who kind of had all the weird books and the books that I would read, like about life after death and ghosts and things like that. And we had a huge library in the house. And so, but I know he didn't have any books on Cayce. So I'm wondering if, I have to check and see, I'm wondering if I heard about him on In Search Of. Because there was a lot of times, like my dad would always watch In Search Of.
Great show.
And I remember like first time I heard about Loch Ness Monster was on that. And so I'm wondering, I have to go back and check because I'm really wondering if that's where I had my first exposure to him and then started like, wow, I need to learn more about this guy and, and that kind of thing. But it could very well have been, that's how I found out.
And that is going to do it for this edition of the S-Files, the life and work of Edgar Cayce. I want to thank everyone for listening on the air as well as following us on our Facebook Live. Our next show is Saturday, December 7th. And in the meantime, everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. John, have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you.
And so we're going to do what the S stands for. This is a bit of a challenge.
Not for me. Well, I'm going to kind of cheat, but to me, it's the Sleeping Prophet.
Sleeping Prophet. I like that.
Yep.
John Jenkinson, what say you? What does the S stand for on this week's S-Files?
Well, this is, it kind of has to do with the theme of the show. But today, I'm going with spirituality.
Nice.
I'm going to say sanatorium.
Ah. But he cured people of tuberculosis.
Exactly. So there's a tie there.
Okay. That's a reach.
That's a reach. But hey, But I want to thank everyone again for listening to the S-Files on WLBL, Lorain County Country, 107.7 FM, 1320 AM, and online, WOBLradio.com. Thanks again. We'll see you on December 7th. Sweet dreams, everybody. Good night.
The proceeding was a paid informational program. The views and opinions expressed were not necessarily those of the staff, management, or advertisers of WOBL Radio.
WOBL